Alright, so we've got a report requirement here. I've created this habit to, when I receive a request for a report, write some notes and try to specify exactly what I'm going to do before I write any SQL. So you can see here that I'm using Adventure Warehouse DW, which is the data warehouse free database you can get from Microsoft. I am using SQL Server 2019. And I need to create a report with 4 columns from the internet sales fact table. The columns are order year, country, product category, and sales amount. And additionally, I want to include subtotals showing a total sales amount for each row. And in those subtotals, I want all countries in whatever year it is in the country column and all product categories in whatever year it is in the product category column. So we want to sort the result by ascending year, ascending country, and then within each country sort the product categories by descending sum of sales amount. Finally, the subtotal row for each year should appear at the bottom of the rows for that year. So let's get started. The first thing is to start with a simple group by query. And I've created this ahead of time because writing the details of this is really not what this video is about. But suffice to say, I've got the internet sales fact table and I've got some data from the geography dimension to get the country code and the product category dimension to get the product category name. So let's have a look at that. So when I run this, you can see that I've got it sorted by column 1, then column 2, and then column 4 descending. So column 1 is year, 2 is country, and 4 is sales amount. So this should sort it by year ascending, and it does. Country ascending, and then descending sales amount. So let's look at 2012 because earlier years don't have as rich data. You can see the countries are sorted within the year. So Australia's first, then Canada, then Germany, then France, Great Britain, and the US. And the product categories are sorted descending within each country. So that's exactly what we want, but that's just the beginning. So next we need to add the subtotals. And by the way, you can see that I've already aliased the columns exactly as they are requested in the spec. And because they've got spaces in them, we need to enclose them in double quotes so that we can handle those spaces. So I'm going to show you 3 ways to do this. The first one is using union all, and union all is not the best way to do it, but I'm going to show you it anyway so that you can see how that's done. So the first thing to do is we've got the original query. Okay, and so in order to add subtotals using this method, what we're going to do is type union all, and then we're going to put another query underneath which adds the subtotals. And to do that, I'm just going to copy this. And to begin with, I am going to replace these with null, because in the subtotal rows we won't need a country value or a product category value, we'll just need the order year. And since we are only using columns from fact internet sales, we don't need any of these joins. Similarly, we don't need these group by fields at all. Now let's just have a look at that on its own. You can see that it's given me 5 rows, 1 for each year, with the sum of the sales amount and null values in these 2 columns. So that's great. Now if we run them together without the order by, we've got all the original data, and then way at the bottom we have the subtotal rows. So what we need to do is get these subtotal rows mixed in with the rest of the data and get it sorted properly. Now let's look what happens when we add the order by clause. Okay, so when we add the order by clause, you can see that it's ordered correctly as before, but the problem here is that the subtotal is actually at the top of each year, which is not what we want. Additionally, we don't have the right labels in these columns. So we need to make a couple of changes. First, change the labels. Second, get those subtotals to the bottom of the group, which isn't as easy as you might think. So first, let's change this. Let's change the labels. So in the country column, we actually want this text here, and in the product category column, we want this text. But of course, we want to replace y with the year of the order date as a character. We'll do the same there. So if we run this now, we should have the right text at least. Okay, so we've got the right text, 2011, all countries in 2011, all product categories in 2011, but it's still at the top. So that's actually not that useful. Now, I'm going to show you something that's going to throw an error, but normally we can just add an extra column in here. So let's try, let's try this. Case when country, in fact, case when left. So that when the first three characters in country equals all, then 1 else 0 end. Now, if that were to work, it would put, it would create a new column essentially in the order by clause, which puts a 1 next to all of the data returned by this part of the union, and a 0 next to all of the data returned by this part. And because we then have it in this position in the sort order, it should then bump the subtotals to the bottom of each group. However, that doesn't work. And it doesn't work because it says invalid column name, country. So let's get rid of that. Get rid of that. Okay, so maybe instead of country, we should use the actual column name. And this also doesn't work, by the way. You can see it doesn't work. Order by items must appear in the select list if the statement contains a union, intersect, or except operator. So basically, because we've got a union here, every column that is listed in order by must be an actual column in the select clause, which means we can't do it here. So what we need to do to work around this is we need to add a column to both parts of the union, which indicates which part each row comes from. So in the case of the top part, we're going to say 0 as country type, and in the bottom part we are going to say 1 as country type. And the result of that will be we can now put country type in there. We can change this to 5 because that sales amount is now the 5th column. And you can see now that each group of rows has the subtotal at the bottom. So 2010, 2011, 2012, that's all good. But the spec has 4 columns, not 5. We have 5 columns here. We need to get rid of this country type. We don't want to extract this or save this column in the view or extract it into whatever data file we're producing. We want to get rid of that column. So to do that, we will either have to put the entire union in a common table expression, CTE, or in a subquery, so that we can then just select the columns that we need. And in fact, I'm going to do it with a CTE because I prefer to do that. And my convention is to use dat as the name for a CTE. So with dat as that, and we put the order by clause outside of the CTE, and now we're just going to select order year country product category and sales amount, from dat, and we just want order by one country type. In fact, just for the sake of clarity, let's put order year, country type, and country and sales amount. So because the select that we're building here does not have a union in it, we can now put country type in the order by without putting it in the select, which means we can just select the 4 columns that we need, but still sort the data that we want to, the way that we want to sort it. And you can see that we now have what we need. Sorted by year, country, with the subtotal at the bottom. Product category is in descending order within each country. 2012 is the good example, and you can see that it looks good. So that's the first way of doing it. It's actually not my favorite way of doing it. I think it's too long-winded, it's too complicated. There are better ways. So the next way I'm going to show you, and if I can just grab this as the starter, the next way I'm going to show you is, in fact, this simple group by is here, isn't it? Let's just copy that, and at the bottom of this we're going to put title rollup method, and this is the second way, and just paste in there the simple group by. Let me just collapse that so that it's out of the way, and this is the rollup method. So the rollup method involves this rollup keyword that we use in the group by clause, and what the rollup keyword does is it allows you to encapsulate one or more columns in the group by clause, and what it will do is it will, depending on the order of the columns within that rollup function, it will create subtotals by rolling up the values in those columns in that order. So just to show you how it works, I've put it around country and category name, and let's see what it does. So you can see here that in 2010 it's created 2 types of subtotal row. So the first type of subtotal row you can see on row 1 is it has rolled up all the countries in 2010 and all the product categories in 2010 to a single subtotal. In fact, that's the subtotal we need. We've got the original data there, the original grouped data there, and then we have the roll up of product category into country. And that's what I mean by when I say that depending on the order of the columns within the roll up function. So it's created this third type of subtotal where it's just subtotaled the product category within that country. And actually we don't want that subtotal, we don't need that. So this is a bit of a problem. We need to find some way to get rid of these rows where country is not null and product category is null. So to do that, there's a function called grouping. And grouping, you put a column inside it, one of the columns that you have used rollup on. And what grouping does is it returns a 1 if the rollup of country has created a null in that column, and it returns a 0 otherwise. And the reason that I use grouping instead of just referring to checking if there's a null in the column is grouping will differentiate between nulls created by the rollup and nulls which are present in the source data. So this can be important in some data sets, so it's useful to have a way of telling them apart. Okay, so I've created 2 new columns, grouping country and grouping category. Let's have a look at those. So you can see that, as I explained, where the rollup creates a null, it displays 1 in the grouping column, and everywhere else it displays a 0. So we as I said before, we've got 3 types of rows in this rollup query. We've got one which has the subtotal that we want, which has nulls in both, and it's just rolled up to the year. We've got one type of row where it's just the group by columns, and we've got one type of row where it's got non-null in the country and null in the product category. So if you look at the grouping fields, this first type sums to 2, this second type sums to 0, and the third type that we don't want sums to 1. So to filter out those rows that we don't want, we can use the having clause to say grouping country plus grouping category not equal to 1. And we use the having clause because grouping is an aggregate function, and we don't use aggregate functions in the where clause, we put them in the having clause. So I'm going to say where grouping, having grouping plus grouping of category is not equal to 1. And if we run that now, it will have gotten rid of those rows that we don't want. And we can see now that we've just got the subtotals that we do want, and this is now looking similar to the union all query. We don't need to keep these grouping fields in the select clause, and it's starting to look a bit tidier. We do need to put the text in here, and we do need to resort it. So let's take the text definition from the union all query. In fact, let's just copy this. We copy that, and then we're going to use the grouping function to modify the select clause here. So we're going to say case when grouping of, when that's equal to 1, then we want the default value. In fact, let's just okay, so when grouping equals 1, then that, else we just want dg country, and that's country. And the definition for product category will be similar. So let's in fact just copy this and just change the details. Just copy that into there, and the table alias into there, and we're going to change, in fact we'll just copy this because copying is easier, and then we want all product categories in here, categories. Okay, so now we've got 2 columns that use the grouping function to determine whether the null in that column was created by the rollup or not. And if it was created by the rollup, it will put this default text as specified in the requirements, and if it wasn't created by a rollup, it will just show the null because it's in the original data. Now of course this is a data warehouse and we're using an adjoin, so there's not going to be any nulls in those columns, but the point still stands for other designs. So let's try this now. You can see, okay, we're getting there. We've got the countries, but they're still at the top. Now, because we don't have union all, we can put whatever we want in the order by clause, which means we can do grouping dg.country region code in the order by clause. So remember, this grouping function for region, country region code, will return 0 for every row that is not a subtotal created by rollup, which means that within each country, within each year, because year is sorted ascending first, within each year we will have all of the normal rows at the top of the year, because they'll have a 0 in that grouping column, and we will have the subtotal at the bottom of the year, and then the rest of the sorting will happen, which will be the countries in ascending order within each grouping, and then the product categories will be sorted by descending sales amount. Okay, so that's done it. We've now got exactly what we wanted. We've got one row per year, country, product category, and sales amount. The product categories are sorted. 2012 is better. The product categories within each country are sorted in descending sales amount order, and for each year, the subtotal with the correct text is at the bottom of the group. Okay, so that's, to me, this is better than using the union all, because we don't have to use a CTE. We don't have to have kind of complicated ways of hacking around the fact that you can't put grouping in the order by. However, we do need to use this having clause, and there is actually a way to do all of this without the having clause, and I'm going to show that to you now. So the next method uses something called grouping sets. So grouping sets are, to me, a more precise way of creating roll-ups. And the way that we create grouping sets is like this. We give ourselves some space first of all, and after the words group by, we type grouping sets, and we have an open and closed parentheses, and within those parentheses we have a list separated by commas of groups of columns, and each group of columns will represent a group or a type of row in the output. Now we want actually two types of row. We want the type of row that represents a group of year, country, product category, and the sum of the sales amount. And the second type of row that we want is it's just grouped by year. And the value in all countries, the value in country and product category is not part of the grouping set. It's just grouped by year. So it is actually as simple as that. We start with the first grouping set, which is year FIS.order_date. The second grouping set is country, region, well, I'll type that in a moment. English. Second grouping set is just going to be, you can see my text messages on the screen, that's great. The second grouping set is going to be just the year. So you can see that I've enclosed each grouping set in its own parentheses. The first grouping set has 3 columns in it, which represents the first type of row. I've got a comma to separate each grouping set, and then the second grouping set is just grouping by the year. So to me at least, this is a much more natural way of expressing what I want the groups in the group by clause to represent. It's easier to understand than ROLLUP. I can list as many different combinations of columns in the grouping sets as I want. In fact, I have written a query in the past that had maybe 40 to 50 different combinations of grouping fields. It was very complicated, but it worked. So let's just have a look at what this does when we run this. So you can see it has created the 2 types of rows. One has group by the 3 fields, and one has group by just the 1 field. But of course, again, it's got the nulls, and they're at the top of the group. So we just do exactly what we did for ROLLUP. We in fact just take these definitions directly from ROLLUP, because this grouping field works with ROLLUP and it works with grouping sets. So I'm just going to take those and replace here. And now let's try it. So we've got the right text. We just need to get the subtotals at the bottom of each group, which of course is just stealing the order by clause from the previous query and putting that there. So it's order by year, grouping of country, then descending sales amount. In fact, I didn't change the title here, but I should do that now. Grouping sets method. So you can see now we have the result we wanted, which is 1 year at a time, ascending countries, descending categories within countries, subtotal at the bottom of the year. Just to show you that this is correct, here's 2012, the subtotals at the bottom, the countries are in ascending order, and within each country, the categories are in descending order of sales amount. So that's that. That is 3 ways of fulfilling this report request, which includes subtotals and very specific requirements for the naming and ordering of items.